Picture this, a lone ship, tossed on the vast, unforgiving Atlantic. This is the Mayflower. But wait, how many people do you imagine are on board? Hundreds, right? That's what most of us think. The reality is far more intimate and intense. There are only 102 passengers, a small band of souls gambling everything on a new world. This isn't just a story from a textbook. It's the gripping tale of their survival against all odds. Our story begins in September 1620, not in America, but in Plymouth, England. The Mayflower, a vessel no bigger than a modern-day tennis court, sets its sails for the Virginia colony. For 102 passengers, plus about 30 crew members, this cramped, creaking ship would be their entire world for the next 2 months. They were a mixed group religious separatists seeking freedom from the Church of England, whom we now call the Pilgrims, and a group of secular colonists, adventurers, and tradesmen simply seeking new opportunities. They called them the Strangers. Imagine these two very different groups, packed together below deck, with their families, their meager belongings, and all their hopes and fears. The journey was not the gentle cruise we might imagine. It was a brutal 66-day ordeal. The Atlantic in autumn is a monster. Ferocious storms hammered the Mayflower relentlessly. Mountainous waves crashed over the decks, sending icy water seeping into the living quarters below. The ship's main beam cracked under the strain, and for a terrifying moment, it seemed they might have to turn back or sink. They managed a makeshift repair using a large iron screw, but the fear must have been constant. Life below deck was a scene of misery. There was no fresh air, no proper sanitation. The ceilings were so low, many adults couldn't stand up straight. Seasickness was rampant, a constant, debilitating illness that left people weak and miserable. The stench of vomit, unwashed bodies, and bilge water would have been overpowering. Their diet was monotonous and nutritionally poor. Hard biscuits, salted beef, and beer. Fresh water was rationed and quickly became foul. In these wretched conditions, disease began to spread even before they reached land. It was a test of endurance, a floating prison where the only escape was the promise of a distant, unseen shore. After more than 2 months at sea, on November 9th, 1620, a cry went up from the lookout. Land ho? But the relief was mixed with confusion and dread. They were not in Virginia. The ferocious storms had blown them hundreds of miles off course, and they found themselves off the coast of what is now Cape Cod, Massachusetts. The landscape was wild, windswept, and utterly unfamiliar. Their original patent, their legal right to settle, was for Virginia. Here they had no authority, no government, no rules. This moment of crisis led to a stroke of genius. Before anyone even set foot on shore, the leaders of the group realized they needed a framework to hold their fragile community together. Aboard the Mayflower, anchored in what is now Provincetown Harbor, 41 of the adult male passengers drafted and signed a revolutionary document. We know it as the Mayflower Compact. It was a simple agreement, but its implications were profound. It declared that they would form a civil body politic, a self-governing community, and create just and equal laws for the general good of the colony. For the first time in this new land, a government was being formed based on the consent of the governed, not the authority of a king. It was a seed of democracy, planted in the cold waters of a New England harbor. With their new rules in place, they spent the next month exploring the coast, looking for a suitable place to build their settlement. Finally, in late December, they chose a site that had been a Wampanoag village called Patuxet, now tragically empty due to a recent plague. They named their new home Plymouth in honor of their departure port. But their arrival coincided with the onset of a brutal New England winter. The first winter was a nightmare. The colonists were exhausted, malnourished, and ill-prepared for the savage cold. They tried to build houses, but the frozen ground and relentless snow made progress painfully slow. For most of that first winter, many of the settlers remained on the Mayflower, which became a floating hospital and morgue. Disease, likely a mix of scurvy, pneumonia, and tuberculosis, swept through the small community. The conditions were horrific. At the peak of the sickness, only 6 or 7 people were well enough to care for all the sick, and dying fetching wood-making fires and burying the dead in secret unmarked graves to hide their dwindling numbers from any watchful native eyes. By the time spring finally arrived, the cost of that first winter was staggering. Of the 102 passengers who had set sail from England, nearly half were gone. Entire families were wiped out. The small graveyard on Coles Hill was a silent testament to their suffering. Yet, incredibly, the survivors endured. They had faced the worst the Atlantic and a New England winter could throw at them, and they were still standing. In April of 1621, a significant event marked the end of this first chapter. The Mayflower, which had been their home, their hospital, and their only link to the world they had left behind, prepared to leave. Captain Christopher Jones and his crew, who had also suffered losses, were ready to sail home to England. Imagine that moment for the survivors, standing on the shore, watching the ship that brought them across the ocean disappear over the horizon. There was no turning back now. They were alone, a tiny outpost of English life on the edge of a vast, unknown continent. But they were not just survivors, they were founders. They had planted their settlement, established their government, and were about to forge a new life. The story of what happened next, of their interactions with the Wampanoag people and their struggle to build Plymouth Colony, is a tale for another day. But the voyage of the Mayflower remains the foundational epic of their journey. Thanks for watching. If you found this story as fascinating as I do, please hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss our next dive into history. See you next time.